Hello, hello. Let's see if people are able to join. Yeah, I see folks trickling in. How's everyone going? We'll give folks a few more minutes to hop in. And let me just double check all the different settings we have here. So we'll get started in just a few more minutes. Cool. Nice. Where's everyone calling in from or tuning in from? Let's see. Sunny San Francisco. Yeah. Your sound seems a bit like okay, let me turn it up just a little bit here. I could turn this up like this. Is this a little bit better? Memphis. All right. Washington, D.C. Nice. Cool, cool. Utrecht in the Netherlands. Wow. Cool, cool. Awesome. Nice. I'll give folks a few more minutes. My name's Tyler. I'm here from Bay Area as well, sunny San Francisco. Here at the Julius AI headquarters. Yeah, so tuning in. But really, really excited today to get started and talk everyone through basically just the first onboarding and how to really get started and some of the best practices in using Julius there. So as we keep on going and as folks keep on trickling in, feel free to leave any questions that you have. At the very end of the onboarding webinar today, we'll have a Q&A session, and then we'll also point you to some of the resources that we have available here, from our documentation to our YouTube videos to even our community forum where you could even ask questions too there. But we'll cover all of that in today's session. Alrighty. Yeah, let's just go ahead and get started. Let me transition us over to the demo screen, right? So if you guys haven't already, again, Julius is free to get started. You could go to julius.ai and you could just sign in right away to get started there. By default, every free account comes with 15 free messages, so you could just plug in your data and start testing it out. We do have an onboarding flow, which helps you get started from there. And after you complete that onboarding flow, this is the screen that you'll see, right? And this is what I think of like the Julius homepage, if you will. Before we hop into the tooling, I'm just going to do a quick overview of just the navigation here and a little bit about the tooling. Up on the top here is our bar here. You could see the connected is our Julius sandbox. This is the dedicated computer and CPU and RAM that we have for your sort of Julius environment. This gives you all the resources that you'll need to run the code, and we'll walk through that today. On the left side here, all the different navigation tools you can navigate to, for example, the threads, notebooks, and files. We also have an inbox here for any notifications. Here's where you could see the most recent product releases from the Julius engineering team as we roll things out every late night. And you can even, if you have teammates on Julius, you'll see notifications of when they've created analysis or notebooks in Julius for you to use as well. But more on that later. And then finally, what I mentioned before, some resources for you to get started too. We have some demonstration notebooks here and ones that have been created by both the Julius team and also by members of the community. And then we also have some documentation that we're always iterating on as we continue to build out more features. And then finally, the community forum, which I mentioned before. Great place for everyone to reach out, even introduce yourselves too, to the rest of the, as we can tell from the chat, from the rest of the world who's using Julius. You might be able to find some other folks that are either working on things very similar to yourself, or maybe some working on something really interesting, all using Julius. And finally, the Models Lab. This is where you get to test out some of the newest models that we've added to both Julius and that are available at your fingertips too. Finally, we have data connectors. I'll talk a little bit more about this a little bit further in the onboarding. And then finally, some more setting pages here. That's a brief overview of just getting started. Let's just dive right in, right? So we see here, this is the basic chat interface. This is essentially how you'll interact with Julius, right? The best way to get started is by uploading a file. So I'll click here, upload a file. And in this one, maybe I'll use some transaction data, right? This is an example data set that I have that simulates like transactions, like a credit card transaction, for example. We'll let this load. While this goes and gets analyzed by Julius, there's several buttons here on the bottom that I'll briefly cover before we dive in a little bit deeper. We have the Julius default model. This is the one by default, right? This is a combination of Anthropic or OpenAI, depending on what you're trying to do. This is the one that's available for all free plans. If you do have a Plus or a Pro subscription, you will have more models to select from. And a little bit more on that later on which ones might be best for certain use cases, for example. I'm not sure why this is taking so long. I think this might be because I'm streaming too, probably, is what I'm imagining. Let me actually just refresh this here. And we'll try a different file. I think that one's just kind of big. Yeah, that was like a gig. We'll just do the user's data for now. So here we have some sample data, and you see a lot faster. This one is a little bit more manageable. Usually it should be faster, but I think in this case it's just because I'm streaming on YouTube Live. But in this case, you'll see Julius right away will do a preview and will load all of the data into a table for you to view, right? Very similar to if you were to load it into something like Google Sheets or Excel. And even some sort of analysis that you'll see on the top. On the right side bar here, we have some other tools at your disposal too, and you can always expand this out a little bit more. This is one of the things that I always do. Reasoning will explain what Julius is doing, and we'll understand a little bit more about the data that you're working with. The Data Explorer is, as you continue to work with Julius, and we'll see this in a minute, all of the underlying data that powers both your insights and analysis, and also later the visualizations will all appear here. So very useful for not having to go back and forth between different tools. Outline for seeing an outline of the work that Julius is doing and its thought process. And then notes as well will explain literally what Julius is doing and its approach too. So let's just go and get started. Before we do this, I'm going to go back to the Data Explorer, and now I'll just say, show me a breakdown of the users by, let's say, gender. It's similar to using other LLMs. You'll just put in your prompt, and right away Julius is going to think through the Python code it needs to generate in order to fulfill that prompt, right? So here's what it's done. It's wrote this Python code out, explained what the Python code does, ran it all inside of this environment, again, that I mentioned earlier, the Julius sandbox, and then printed out the results, right? So here we see the rough breakdown between male and female. Let's say this isn't enough. Let's say I want to see, show me the breakdown of ages and years of birth in a chart. Again, Julius is going to think through how to do it, and then it's going to run and execute that Python code. This is all within our threads interface, right? This is the easiest way to get started. It's similar, like a very chat-oriented interface there. And you can see this is an interesting way to visualize it, but distribution of current age, so it shows like the breakdown, and then, which makes sense, the inverse, which is the distribution of birth year, so basically when were they born, right? And this data set uses a time frame from 1920s all the way up to 2000, right? It's synthetic data, for example. The other thing that Julius will do is we'll overview some of the analysis and the visualizations, right? So what Julius is doing is it's looking at the outputs of these charts, and it's giving you some of the basically an explanation of the chart, and then also the explanation of what's going on underneath the hood, right? As I mentioned before, if you look at the Data Explorer, you can actually expand this out, and you'll see, again, this is all of the different rows and columns that are powering this data set. And you'll see all of the different things like ID, current age, retirement age. You could ask all the different questions using this here too. But again, I think for most folks, the easiest way to say that Data Explorer is the most useful because it helps you first see and visualize the data as it's being used by Julius, but also as you're transforming it. For example, if you were to filter out specific rows or columns, you'll see all of that done here in the Data Explorer as well. Cool. Let's talk through some of these other tools at the bottom here. So besides the Model Explorer, we have several tools like chart themes. Chart themes allow you to first either use some of the preset, what we call chart themes, or ways that you could style some of the visualizations that Julius will do. Or you could even use the theme settings to create your own theme here. So you'll click on new themes and you could input things like your own colors. For example, if you're working at a company or you're working for a university or doing some research, you could use the specific colorings that you need in order for your charts to match whatever work you're doing, whether you're preparing slide decks or whether you're publishing a research paper too. You could go even beyond just colors. You could add things like line weights, point markers, and really get into the nitty-gritty details about how you want to visualize some of the charts. If that's a little bit too much work, again, you could just go back to the themes here and you could select one of the preset ones that we've made for you. Side tip, I would try out the interactive beta chart. Maybe if we have time later today, I'll give it a try, but give it a test and see. I think that's one of the most common requests that we get from a lot of users everywhere is, hey, I want something to help me with my dashboards or something that's a little bit more interactive, right? We'll demo that one out as well. While we're here in the settings panel, let's talk through some of the other really basic features and functionality here. We have things like light mode and dark mode for your night owls. I know like us at the Julius team, we're working around the clock here, so very popular for folks that are working late in the hours. Again, the different models you could select, and again, you show more here to select the different more Anthropic or more advanced GPT models too. Some other buttons here, if you want to show the code, for example, you could show or disable this by default. You could use the same code for running and executing Python, for example. This one's one that we get a lot of questions about. It's the web search, right? If you don't have the data at your fingertips that you need, or you want Julius to do research, we could actually access the web just like most other LLMs. It'll search the web for information, news headlines, recent statistics, anything you're looking for where an LLM normally would be able to search, you can give Julius the ability to do that here with this toggle. Auto running code, typically leave this on, but if you ever want to check the code before you run it, you could disable it. And then finally, advanced reasoning, which I'll talk through in the next prompt. So let's click out of here and let's just say in advanced reasoning, I wanted to do something very complex, right? I wanted to make a histogram showing, let's say, what do we have over here? Debt by, let's say, birth year. We'll try this out over time. Somewhat complex, right? And then I'll say maybe and by number of credit cards. If you really do want to use a very complex prompt, you can do that in Julius. I would advise, one way you could do this is by turning on advanced reasoning. And what we'll see here is if I go over into the reasoning tab, after I enter this prompt in, Julius will actually plan out all of the different steps it'll need in order to first execute and then fulfill the prompt that you're looking for, right? Think of this like a multi-step approach to get started, especially for really complex, just single prompts, right? If you don't want to break your prompt up into multiple steps. So here Julius is planning to first check the different columns to see. Ooh, this is perfect. So you'll see Julius ran into an error here, right? You're not going to be the first time you see this. Sometimes the code it runs might need to be slightly adjusted based off of either the data explorer I was talking about, so like the underlying data, or it might need to be slightly tweaked in order to fulfill like the output, right? If it needs to do a histogram, maybe you need specific columns that just don't exist. The cool thing is Julius will actually debug these in real time. So you don't need to know how to do code. I don't know how to do any Python myself. I don't really understand any of these errors, but Julius will handle it in order for us to get to the final destination. And again, I would advise you just keep your eye on the data frames as well. If you're ever curious, and this is a common question that we get from a lot of people, how do you validate or verify the results of Julius? Well, you could see the data being transformed in real time. And a lot of times when something either goes wrong with the visualization or you get a result that you're just really not looking for, it's because Julius either transformed the data and went with it in a different direction or something happened to the data frame here. And you can just monitor that and just get it back on track if you ever need to, right? There. Cool. So Julius is still working through it. I think it gets kind of tricky when I said birth year and credit card groupings. I think there's several ways that you can group these together, but we'll see how Julius does here. I'm going to go back to the reasoning tab, and you'll see as Julius ran into those errors, it added that to the plan. These are ways that it's going to try to fix and update and basically adjust and course correct in order to fulfill the prompt. Cool, so here we go. So here we see the three different histograms. I have one for birth year and number of credit cards. Actually, they're all for number of credit cards. Number of credit cards, amount of debt is on the left side, and the histogram of birth year here underneath. And then you'll see the explanation here as well. So that's one example of using advanced reasoning. In my opinion, I would break things down in multiple steps yourself. I found a lot more success, and I've seen a lot of users have a lot more success doing that. And one of the best ways that we could actually demo that, which I'll show, is in our notebooks. So I'm going to go over here into the side panel. I'll go ahead and click New, and I'll click on Notebooks. If you're not familiar with Python or Jupyter Notebooks, you could think of a notebook similar to building blocks, right? That's one common way. It's very similar to that same chat interface that we were talking about before, but instead of talking to Julius one after another, you could actually organize and break down complex analysis or visualizations using what we call cells here, right? So here we have what we call a source cell, which is similar to the upload file that I used at the very beginning of the webinar. And then I have what we call a prompt cell here, which is essentially the same chat box, right? But the really cool thing that you could do is also add in multiple cells in between or above or before as Julius is doing the analysis. And you could even add things like code cells if you really do want to add your own either Python, SQL, or R code. Or you could even change it to a text code, for example, if you want to add a video or you want to share this notebook with someone, right? So there's a lot more functionality and features that are built into notebooks that help facilitate better sharing and collaboration, which I'll talk about as we go through this. But in the meantime, I'm just going to remove all of those ones so I have a clear slate. I'm going to add in a different data source. Let's try something else. Let's use, I'll go to my datasets tab. I have a whole bunch here from all the different demos that I've done. Let's try to use a business data set, and I'll do one for user subscriptions. I love this one, right? So right away, Julius is going to do that same sort of thing. It's going to take a look at our analysis or our data set. It's going to look at the different columns. And again, you can go over here in the top right, and you can click on the sidebar, and you can expand this as Julius will begin to work with the data. And the first thing I'll do is I'll just say something simple, and I typically always do this is load and preview the data. And you can click Run, which will essentially execute this prompt. And you'll see the outputs just like we saw in the threads interface outputting here inside of our notebook. So here you'll see that the data connector was created. And this is an example of the data that we're working with. And it's similar to like a software as a service company or anyone that is subscribing to a product. You'll see their user ID, when they subscribed at, and when they canceled at. The other cool thing, and we saw this both in the threads and in the notebooks, are suggested next steps. You know, data analysis and insight sometimes is more exploratory, so you don't really know what the end goal is. But here we see Julius recommend some of the different ways that you could analyze the data using the context that it has about the data that we've uploaded. The really cool thing here is that you could add multiple data sources, right? So if, for example, I had customer relationship meeting data, I had Q1 revenue, user subscriptions, even CRM activities, you could add those all, both in notebooks and in threads, and you could use those in your analysis all at the same time, and you could join them together, no problem. So we'll go ahead and let this get going, and then I'll zoom up here, and then you'll see the different data sets get loaded. So here you see all the different ones that I've had. So CRM meeting data, it's another synthetic data set with salespeople and some of the clients that they're working with. I have one for revenue. So you could really load as much as you want to. Cool. And I mentioned some of the cells before, so I'll show you what I mean. So say, for example, I wanted to, let's say visualize the sales by salesperson. You can do this. And unlike the threads interface where you have to work sort of linearly, you could always add new cells before, or you could work, circularly too. So you could add cells before, after, you could erase cells, you could rerun cells. And the really cool thing about notebooks is you could share them with someone else, and they could go through and first see the analysis that you've done, and then also either replace the data with their own data or modify or update the prompts that you've used too. So here we see the visualizations there. We get a lot of questions from people about which models they should use, right? So if you are subscribed to Plus or Pro, you do have the option to change the models here like before. Typically the Julius default one is pretty decent. Contextually, I would say the O3 one is actually really good at doing the analysis, while the Claude Force Sonnet is a lot better at making the visualizations too. So let's actually test that out here. I'm going to select Sonnet, and I'm going to rerun the cell that visualized it, and we'll do this all over again from scratch. You'll see very different ways. And again, these models are non-deterministic. And that means essentially they always try to find a way to fulfill your prompt, and it's not always going to be the same way, right? That's a really common question that we get from folks. Why does my chart look different? Or why did it do a different sort of analysis? And that's because the models aren't predetermined on like how they're going to try to resolve your prompt. But I'll demonstrate some of the really cool ways that we've trying to help standardize and make your analysis and visualizations at least more consistent, right? So here we'll see how it did. And you can see, look at that. It's a completely different chart, right? And that's because we used a different model there. And the cool thing is you could test it out. You could test out all the different models that you have at our disposal, or you could also subscribe to our YouTube channel. We have all these different videos that we're going to be releasing that show the different models' outputs and the ways that they interpret or release the prompts. Cool. So we have this one here. Let's say, for example, I wanted to, let's go back to here. I'm just going to go back to the O3 one, and I'll try one of these suggested next steps. We'll do like examine sales activities by salesperson. And we'll see, maybe it'll visualize by customer. We'll see. And all this time while Julius is understanding your data set, this is all within this notebook. You do have the option in the chat settings, right? Or I'm sorry, if you go to the threads, which I'll open up, you could also enable, I think I didn't cover this yet, extended memory, which I'll talk about too. All right, so here we have the notebook trying to fulfill this. And the other really cool thing I didn't mention, there's a lot to notebooks. You see the different way that it's tried to visualize this one too. But CRM activities by salesperson, and then you'll see the types of activities here in this sort of heat map chart. The cool thing is you could share this notebook, right? So I could share this with anyone on the internet, similar to like a Google Doc or a Notion doc, or I could invite specific people to join me in this notebook. And similar to a Notion doc or a Google Doc, they could hop right into the same exact notebook and see these outputs and prompts in real time. They could see me typing in real time. They could even run their own analysis at the same time as me within the same notebook. And we've seen this request from a lot of both folks working at companies or also people doing research projects with their teammates, right? You might want to work with someone cross-collaboratively, or you want someone else to have their inputs. So we added that ability to do that in notebooks with our collaboration feature. Cool. The one thing I wanted to demo before we go back to the extended memory is the buttons that you see here on the top, right? There's several buttons here to look at. Delete cell, pretty clear. This will just delete the cell. Clear outputs will remove everything except for the prompt. Hide outputs is just going to collapse everything. It makes it a little bit tidier when you don't really need to see the outputs of a cell. Maybe it's like a helper cell, for example. And the one I want to talk about is turn into repeatable steps, right? So going back to that topic about, LLMs determining the best way to approach a prompt, and it might not always be the same exact way, you can actually separate out the code, and I click the button there, and you'll separate out the prompt I wrote, so examine sales activities by salesperson, and you'll separate it out from the code itself. So I'm going to click accept 3 changes. And what we've just done is we've created a prompt cell, or a text cell, sorry, that just explains what those next cells do. And we solidified and made the code itself concrete here, so this won't change. And as we continue through this notebook, if I were to rerun the analysis, for example, Julius won't think through a new way to do or generate code to fulfill the prompt. It's just going to use the code it generated from the last time, right? And we've seen this has dramatic results when it comes to getting more consistent results in visualizations. Before, you saw me create 2 different charts for visualizing the outputs of salespeople. If I had just done this step and I had separated out the code, you would have only seen the same type of chart, right? We're not rerunning or regenerating any of the code that's going to be run. All of it will be done here. And this is a really cool feature within notebooks. So again, I would say the learning curve to notebooks is a little steeper than using the chat threads, but the functionality is dramatically more advanced and gives you a lot more capabilities too. If you're not sure how to get started using notebooks, we have several videos in our YouTube for you to reference as well. We have these webinars on recurring basis too. We'll probably do one on notebooks specifically where we'll go even more in depth, maybe on a use case. And you could also visit our documentation here, and I'll do a quick little plug. You can click Docs over here, and this has everything you'll need to get started. And we have a notebook section with a breakdown of all the different sorts of cells you could do and examples on how to build and run a notebook from scratch for you to get started. If this isn't enough, then feel free to reach out. The best place to get support is on the community forum. I'll add another plug here. You could just join here, and you could release or add a new thread or just, hey, ask a question like, hey, this is what you're trying to do, and we're always checking this as well. If you have an urgent issue, like always, you could reach out to our support team at team@julius.ai, and we'll get back to you within 24 to 36 hours, usually a lot faster, depending on the time of day. Last thing I want to touch on before we circle back to Q&A is just the extended memory, and just to give you a little preview. And I'll do one more thing. I'll do we'll overview the data connectors too, which I think would be interesting to at least let you guys know what we're working on. Here in the threads, the other cool button that we didn't talk about was extended memory. What this does is it gets the context of our previous chats and uses that in the analysis too, right? Why is this useful? Well, imagine you took a break for the day, or maybe a couple weeks ago you were working on a research paper. If you want Julius to keep that context over time, we could extend its context, what we call the context window, by taking more of that data from your conversations, using another LLM to summarize it all, and then keeping that with you, sort of like a backpack as you continue to do your data analysis. Really useful for keeping context. So if you're defining certain formulas for MRR, for example, it might be different depending on what company you're at. If you're defining certain variables or certain things that you want to keep consistent throughout all of your conversations with Julius, enable extended memory and it'll keep that with you. Cool. Last thing I want to talk about is the data connectors, right? This is something that the team's been really focused on, and I think it's probably one of the most exciting features that we've built out at Julius to date. We use it every single day. You'll see over here on the left side, set up data connection in the navbar. Actually 5, we added a data connector just last night. 5 different ways that you can connect, maybe 6. I think we released a few more. But you can set up a data connection here, and you can connect to very popular data warehouses or data connectors, what we call, to Julius. So you don't have to, either write some query to download data and then upload it back into Julius, or take a file and download it and then re-upload it back to Julius. Here, for example, if you use the Google Drive connection, you could pull data directly from Google Drive, whether it's a Google Sheet, whether it's a Google Doc or a PDF, or even if it's like form results from like a survey that you had users fill out. You could actually pull that directly into Julius without needing to download it and upload it. And the really cool thing is you could write all of the different analysis or export the analysis to that same connector too. So you don't have to download it from Julius and re-upload it back to Google Drive. We've seen it just makes and streamlines the entire process of doing data analysis a lot easier. And we're constantly building out new ones. So we have ones on the roadmap for OneDrive, for SharePoint, for Dropbox, you name it, right? If you don't see a connector here that we don't have, did I say that right? If you don't see a connector that you want us to have, you can click the Need Something Else button here and just fill out this type form, and this will let us know like, hey, which are the ones that are most requested or ones that would be most useful for you to use in your data analysis. The other ones I didn't talk about were BigQuery and Snowflake. These are really, really cool. If you guys do have data stored in one of these data warehouses, or even if you don't, right? I know BigQuery and Snowflake both have sample databases for users to use to test out Snowflake and BigQuery. You can test it out, just connect to it. And the really cool thing is when you start a new thread or notebook, you could actually use these data sources too, if it is connected. I'll use the thread here. And you'll be able to connect and select it from the data source here. Probably more to that in the next webinar we host. I'll demonstrate out exactly how to do this, but essentially you won't even need to write the SQL or the query in order to pull the data into Julius. Julius will actually do both. It'll write the SQL, and then it'll also write the Python code to execute it and do the analysis, and then it'll all do it all in the same workplace. Really, really exciting, but we'll share more about that later. And I think that's most of what I want to cover in this one. I know that's a lot of material. If there's anything else that you want to know, leave us a comment in either the video here, and we're going to release this recording afterwards. Let us know in the community forum, or reach out to us at team@julius.ai, and we'll be more than happy to answer any questions that you have. All right. I'm going to take the next 5 minutes or so to switch over to the Q&A. As you get to see the Julius head in the background there. Take a look at the chat. I know the team's been answering your questions, so let me take a look here. Any top of mind? Yeah. If I'm correct, you could reuse, yep, exactly. Yeah, you could reuse a notebook. Exactly. So for example, if I were to do like the example you mentioned, if you had a data set with financial data and you had to do like a budget analysis, for example, if you build the notebook the first time and it does exactly what you want and the outputs look beautiful and amazing, you could actually just update the data set that you're using and then just use that and rerun all of the cells and it'll output. The caveat there is that you might get slightly different results, again, because of the non-deterministic nature of the models. It will think through different ways to do it, unless you use the code splitter out, or what I call the way that helps standardize more. And then you can separate out the code itself, and that'll literally run through the same exact data set, just with the date slightly different because it's more up-to-date data. But that's the cool thing about all of these notebooks, is that you could rerun these multiple times once you have the analysis ironed out in a way that you like it, and then you could share it with the team for them to do, and they could even tweak it. You could make copies of the notebook and you could slightly adjust it if you need to. It's a lot more flexible than the threads where everything's just locked within one single thread and one link, right? Cool. Igor, you said, this so far seems quite simple, very impressive, but can you show an advanced stat analysis like regression model making clusters or try? Yeah, absolutely. I would say, let me go back to my demo screen. You can actually go to the Explore Notebooks page, and we have a logistic, oh my gosh, I can't spell it, logistic regression, I think, data set that we put together. Let's see if I have it here. There's several data sets here that you have where we've built out notebooks to do the sort of analysis. And you'll see, use the least squares method to find the best line of fit. This is one example. If I look for another one, I wanted to see like k nearest neighbors, right? I wonder if this one's here. Neighbors. Maybe it's not in this one. But we've built out several notebooks, and if you explore the data, the notebooks page, there's a lot of different, more advanced analyses than just the really basic ones that I was demoing earlier that you could see here. And then I would say tune into the community forum where we've shared some of those as well. But you could do some of the more advanced ML stuff, for example. I have no technical background myself, but I was able to train a logistic regression model for recognizing email spam, right? If you had asked me that before doing Julius, I wouldn't have known what any of those words meant, but Julius is able to walk through all the different steps and execute the Python code to help first train the model, test it, and then evaluate it, and then refine it and fine tune if you needed to. So again, Julius is used by folks like myself who are non-technical looking for data insights, but they're also used by data scientists too, who are trying to train their models without needing to write the Python code over and over and over again. Cool. Sweet. Maybe time for 2 more questions. I see that the team's been answering most of them in here. Any other top of mind questions? Nice. Yeah. Biological background. We use Julius to create visualizations. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Let me go back to sharing this, right? So the data visualization page is a great way to get started and just look through the different ways that you could get started using Julius and the different visualizations. That's one way. But the other way, which I think is the one you kind of I forgot about or forget about, is if you just ask Julius, we'll say, what are the different visualizations that you can create that are used by biologists and biology researchers. You could even ask Julius, and Julius knows of its capabilities. It's not self-aware yet, but it's able to know what it's capable of doing. And the reason for this is we could use any Python library that's out there. You might need to, Julius will update itself if it's missing a library, for example, but if it's out there and it's public and it's available for users to use, Julius can use it itself. And that's why any sort of analysis or visualization that you're looking for, you could assume Julius has read every single data science textbook out there It's seen every single visualization out there, so it should be able to do it. Whether it's biology research or even financial data, or we even had some users and research students doing audio analysis on honeybee hives, right? Who would have known that there's a way to visualize it, but Julius is able to do it for them too. So a lot of different ways. And if you're not sure, feel free to ask Julius what it can do. And if you're not seeing the language, like for example, the other common question is how do you change the language, right? You could just go to customize Julius. Under these custom instructions, you could add in like, hey, respond to me in Spanish or respond to me in German or whichever language, and all the different outputs will be translated. And the other cool thing about the custom instructions is you could keep more context over time, or if there's a specific way you want things formatted, tell Julius how to do it here. And this will be, again, if you think about it like a backpack, it'll be carried around wherever Julius goes. It'll use it in all the analysis that it does for you. There. Yeah, there's a whole bunch of different ways that it could do some of these, and just the other way, just give it a try, and just see if it's able to do it. I don't think I've ever seen a chart that it wasn't able to do that I was looking for, but who knows? If there is one that you're looking for, you're not seeing the chart that you're looking for, let us know, and then we can look out. Cool. I'll go back to Q&A. Any other questions? One last one. Ooh, Majid, great question. All right. In terms of security for the data, we are very restricted in clinical work. Did you think about this? How do we deal with this? Yeah, very, very common question, not just for, especially for health and for PII and HIPAA requirements, but also for most enterprise customers, right? Whenever you have either user data or you have confidential information or intellectual property, it's all things that you want to be a little cautious about when you're putting it into any site, whether or not it's Julius or whether or not it's a LLM or not, right? I'll go back to sharing my screen here. You can actually navigate to our Trust Center, which is where I'll point you. If I go back to, I'm just going to go to julius.com or julius.ai. And if you scroll to the very bottom here, you'll see our Trust Center, which is right here, which is trust.julius.ai. This has all of our different first compliance programs that we have here at Julius. So how do we maintain your data, or what happens to your data when you put it into Julius? You'll see our different compliance industry standard programs like SOC 2 Type 2, GDPR in progress, and we're working on our HIPAA and some of these other ones as well, but you'll be able to see all of the updates here in the compliance as we make progress and headway on those. And for example, if you look into some of these documents, you can even request things like our most recent SOC 2 Type 2 audit report, security one-pagers, etc. And if you have any questions about, specific policies or like, hey, what literally happens, to the data, if you're not able to find an answer here, you can just send us a message at security@julius.ai. It's a more monitored inbox by our security team here, and they'll be able to answer any questions that either you or your organization or procurement department or head of security has, right? Just as like a really brief mention, all of the data that you input into Julius is your data, right? You maintain ownership of the rights of the data as long as you had rights of the data. We have opted to use every single model that does not train on your data, right? So with all of our different providers from OpenAI to Anthropic, we've opted to use the API connections with them that don't train on your data. So everything remains in your hands, right? All of the data is encrypted in transit and at rest, which means that none of us can look at it. And the other thing is, we don't train on your data, right? The only folks that are able to look at the prompts are some of the engineering team, and they only look at the outputs, trying to make sure that, it looks the way it does, and trying to just improve the features of Julius. That's to the extent of what we use your data for. But if you do have any specific questions, or if there's other things at top of mind that, just would help you guys first use Julius more or get your organizations to use Julius, again, just reach out at security@julius.ai, and we'll be able to answer any questions that you have there. Cool. Sweet. That's all for me. Again, thank you guys so much for tuning in. Really, really excited for first you guys to get started using Julius. I know that is quite a lot to get started, but again, really reach out to us if you guys do have any questions. Feel free to post on that community forum. Even just let us know what you're working on. I think that's the really cool thing is when people share notebooks of some of the data that they're working with, or maybe some of the cool visualizations that we're making. I've seen some really impressive ones. Feel free to share it there. And we'll host another couple more of these webinars too. We'll do ones more on notebooks or more specific deep dives on specific use cases. But if there's a specific topic that you're looking for, feel free to reach out in the comments or on the community forum as well. Cool. And then finally, yeah, we'll follow up in an email with the recording, and then also some other resources for you as well, and as a few thank yous, yeah, for joining today. So I hope you guys have a great rest of your evening, morning, or night, wherever you're tuning in. But thank you guys so much for joining, and hope you get the most out of Julius, and we'll see you next time.